Regency. Regency. How is this name pronounced? This video is going to be about this new synthesizer by the developer Nakst Audio Plugins, who has already made multiple synthesizers that all look pretty cool. This developer strongly believes in supporting open formats, which is why all of these plugins are only available as Clap plugins and as FL Studio native plugins. I don't know how that works, but I will definitely use the Clap version in Bitwig. This synthesizer is definitely a very interesting one because it is based on phase distortion. While I do have a lot of wavetable synthesizers and FM synthesizers and all this kind of stuff, I don't have a lot of phase distortion synthesizers. I think I only have one from Full Bucket. I think, yeah, I once tested a Full Bucket synthesizer with phase distortion, I think. So it's going to be exciting, that's for sure. But before starting, I want to tell you something about this developer, because this developer is actually kind of insane. I want to show you the website of the developer. The developer makes all kind of stuff, not just plugins, but also, I guess, 3D software, something with fractals and video games. Oh yeah, that looks nice. And they also made their own tutorial about how to make Clap plugins from scratch without any framework. I have to read this at some point. This is just one page of code and it's not too much. There are just 4 other pages and then you have already a complete plugin in Clap format in C++. So yeah, even including a GUI. So I don't know how this developer pulls that off, but I definitely want to find out at some point, because it would be kind of cool to just be independent of the Juice framework when making plugins like that. So that's definitely already an incredible effort for the plugin development community. Now getting back to the topic phase distortion. When you're thinking of distortion, you are usually thinking like that. You have some sort of wave, and then you have some sort of wave shaper function. Let's call it fx is 10h of 4x, and then you can call this function on your input signal and you get a distorted wave, the green one in this case. That's how you usually think of distortion, you know. And sometimes you have sort of an input gain, maybe a little bit like this. Then you can tweak how much it should distort the input wave. Yeah, that's how you usually think of distortion. Basically something that transforms some point on the curve to some other point on the curve that is slightly more squashed. But phase distortion is different. It is so different that I couldn't even demonstrate it here in Desmos. I will have to use the very professional phase distortion demonstration tool, Microsoft Paint. And here I will now draw something, which is, let's say I'm drawing a waveform, a sine wave. The sine wave goes on here, but I'm just interested in this single wave cycle. This is one wave cycle of the sine wave, and the sine wave goes on infinitely here. And what phase distortion now does is, instead of taking one point on the x-axis and then defining a new y point for it, it shifts the waveform in time. You can always describe a waveform in such a manner that it's just a straight line that goes from 0 to 1. Let's just say that this is 0 and this is 1. And then you could have a different line for this transfer function, maybe one like this that goes up a little bit earlier. And this would describe that you go to a later stage of this waveform earlier in the wave cycle. So I guess in this case that might look a little bit like this. Yeah, maybe this is the point where it suddenly gets stretched out again. So at this point it would suddenly go a bit like this. So this is how it would skew this sine wave now. Obviously this is some sort of distortion because it changes the waveform and it will definitely add some harmonics, but it will not add harmonics in the same way as a wave does that is being crushed. In my experience, things that are being distorted in phase distort the sound in a more subtle way, in a way that you wouldn't even describe as distortion, because distortion has something crunchy to it, and this type of distortion really doesn't. It's more like you're shifting to a different wavetable thing. You will see what I mean when we are checking out the plugin, which happens now. So first of all, I need some sort of harmony or melody or something. Nice. Kind of reminds me of some old funk track. Maybe we could even dial in some swing on this thing. Not quite sure if I like this lower note stuff. No, let's keep it like this. Okay, now it is time to actually check out the synthesizer. So as you can see, there are basically two oscillators that you can turn on and off. Then there is a filter section, global pitch, amplitude, 3 different envelopes. And each of them can be assigned to 3 parameters by clicking here and then clicking on something else. And what is this? 2 MAV objects. What is a MAV modulator? Not quite sure what this is. And then there is the modulation matrix. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this modulation system already. Then there are the LFOs, which for some reason are around here instead of where the other modulation system things are. You can draw a shape for the LFO, and then there is rate and whether it should repeat, I guess. The section down here is pretty cool as well. There you can just put 3 effects in series. I already tested this a little bit. That's why I already have quite an overview. But yeah, the interesting stuff is in the center of the interface. Actually, I want to load an oscilloscope because there is an oscilloscope down here, but I want to see the waveform a little bit bigger. I guess you could already see and hear that this is just not the typical kind of distortion. Actually, it's kind of unpredictable. Sometimes you're drawing a shape in here and you think like, okay, this is going to be a smooth shape, and then the sound will be all and then you're making something with very sharp transitions and suddenly it is going all smooth. I don't know, it's just a very experimental way of creating sound, but one that often leads to very different flavors that have quite convincing textures. The only problem that I see here, but I have already told the developer about it, is that you don't have sensitive drag on these knobs, especially with knobs like the face knob, where a little difference can already change the sound drastically. It would be cool if there was a way to dial it in a little bit more subtle, but yeah, let's not be too pedantic about it now. I just want to go on and try more stuff. For example, the second layer. Okay, now I found a sound that sounds pretty cool on both Gen Layer 2 and 1. I'm not quite a fan of what the sync amount does, because even small amounts already sounded like crazy and it's getting very crushy, but you can also change the sound by adding post FX like a Bitcrusher. Would be kinda cool if there was the possibility to A/B how it is with and without the effect. At the moment you can only do that by dialing down the mix knob, which is sufficient now. But for example, if my patch required me to use a mix value that is not 100%, like maybe 74, then I could not easily bypass the effect by pulling it back to 0, because I would have to find the 74 again after that to go back to wet. That's why it's always useful to have just on and off switches on effects in plugins. Now that's pretty cool. When you're key tracking the filter, it basically becomes an instrument in itself. I always love when synthesizers make that very easy to do. And yeah, this filter sounds really cool. When I turn up the resonance really hard, you can really hear the pitch. It would be cool if the cutoff parameter also showed the pitch, and if there was like a little button that can be pressed in order to tell the filter that you always want the cutoff to be snapped to the nearest pitch instead of just being in hertz in general. That's always very useful. Yeah, okay, the portamento, I cannot test it when I'm going into it with polyphonic material, so let's just disregard that now. Instead, let's try the amplitude envelope. Let's go. Oh, the delay of the flanger definitely needs some parameter smoothing. that's pretty cool. I just dialed in the flanger a little bit and suddenly the whole sound sounds super three-dimensional. Nice. What can we try next? I like the equalizer here, by the way. Like, you know, normally I prefer equalizers like Pro Q, where you can just draw a curve. But sometimes I'm just totally happy with just a bunch of knobs for individual frequency ranges, and splitting the signal into 5 ranges just seems like a very good choice to me. Because then you can have a workflow like this, where you can just dial down all of them and then come up with a gain level for each of them one by one. Sweet. Let's try the Bitcrusher again, maybe. Interesting. So apparently the output gain of this synthesizer comes before the effect section, which becomes very noticeable with the Bitcrusher enabled, because the Bitcrusher sound changes when the amplitude is being changed. Oh, there is a master global up here as well. Okay, so apparently I can just use this one. Okay, now that is nice, because now I can use this amplitude intentionally as a pre-FX chain amplitude, and then I can use the volume one for the general volume that goes out of the plugin. Nice. Would be kind of cool if this thing was automatically compensated. So when I'm turning up the amplitude, I'm basically getting no volume difference if there is no effect in the chain that does something non-linear, and only if there is something non-linear in it, like a Bitcrusher, you would hear the amplitude knobs actually doing something. That would be very useful, because that would mean that I can tweak this without having to tweak this one as well all the time, because they are very far away from each other. Alright, pretty nice. Now let's actually try to dial in the last transfer curve as well, just because we can, and see how that changes the sound. Sweet. Okay, it's kind of cool because the workflow with these transfer curves, as you have seen, I haven't used this synthesizer a lot yet. Before I made this video, I only used it once, very quickly, like 5 minutes or something, just because I wanted to get a basic idea if I want to make a video about it and everything. And as you can see, I'm already at the point where I'm just randomly putting points here and quickly throwing them around and just feeling into the synthesizer what it does and how I can use it and stuff like that. And then I'm coming up with funky sounds like this that are definitely really cool. Save patch. Funk. I just call it funk. Alright, now I saved my funky patch.